Greetings and welcome to a special edition of What's Trending. I know there are lots of things trending this week that we can laugh at, but allow me the opportunity to put a temporary pause on these topics as we have something much more important to discuss. This episode will be split in two parts. We will examine the issue of Venezuela's aggression towards Guyana. I will provide a timeline and give you a historical breakdown of the Guyana-Venezuela controversy over the Essequibo in chronological order starting in the 17th century. If you clicked on this video to skin your teeth, you might as well click away right now, because this video is for people who want to understand what is happening with Guyana and Venezuela and why. Peep the intro quick and let's get to it.
Hey, something ever surprise you like when you see it, you go, what?
Before we get started, give me a like on the like button and allow me the chance to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Sheriff Security, GT Eats and Powered Automotive. The historical controversy between Guyana and Venezuela over the Essequibo region is a complex issue that is deeply rooted in the colonial era. Despite many efforts to resolve this controversy through diplomatic means, it has persisted for centuries. The discovery of vast amount of hydrocarbon resources in Guyana's exclusive economic zone off the coast of Essequibo brought renewed attention to the issue in 2015. As more oil is discovered, the issue becomes more a matter of significant geopolitical importance. The ongoing judicial process at the International Court of Justice is the path Guyana has chosen to a peaceful resolution. But it seems Venezuela is anticipating an unfavorable ruling and is preparing to hold a referendum to ask its people to agree to disregard the ICJ's position. So, how did we get here? Let's rewind to the 17th century. In 1648, the Guyanas were recognized as Dutch territory by the Treaty of Münster, which ended the war between Spain and the Dutch. Venezuela was Spain's territory and the Dutch was in control of the colonies of the Guyanas. The Dutch held the territory of the Guyanas for 166 years, during which time there was the major slave rebellion of 1763. But that's a topic for another video. After the Napoleonic Wars in 1814, the Dutch lost control of 3 colonies to the British. These 3 colonies were Berbice, Demerara, and Essequibo, which became the Guyana of the British, aka British Guyana. It is important to note that Venezuela at this time was now a newly independent country at just 2 years old. And this is where things get interesting. But before we continue, now's a good time to tell you that the #1 security service in Guyana is Sheriff Security. For armed or unarmed guards and high-tech security solutions, the Sheriff is at your service. Plus, they're looking for more guards. If you're looking for work during this robbery season, visit Sheriff on Sheriff Street, Sir Brianville, and tell them Mudwata sent you. And if you're hungry, GT Eats is an app that lets you order food in Guyana from top restaurants and pay securely online with your credit or debit card. You could download the GT Eats app at the Apple or Android stores. Finally, Powered Automotive is holding a Black Friday sale with deep discounts on truck and engine parts, up to 50% off selected items. They're the biggest truck parts store in Guyana, and this is their first customer appreciation sale. Keep your heavy-duty engines running smoothly with Powered Automotive, the #1 heavy-duty engine and truck parts store in Guyana. Call them on 697-0171 and ask for the Dirty Mudwata deal. Moving on. If you're still here, it means you have a keen interest in this topic. Just do me a favor there and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And turn on post notifications so you could get updates when we post new videos, like part 2 of this one. So, not too long after the British took over in 1823, there was another major slave rebellion dubbed the Demerara Uprising. But again, this is a topic for another video. Venezuela at this point was starting to express concerns over the border between them and British Guyana. History refers to the Shamburg Line as the main issue of contention which seemingly encroached on their territory. Sir Robert Herman Shamburg was a German-born geographic explorer for Great Britain, who in 1840 marked this map, which shows the territories of British Guyana, Brazil, Venezuela, and Dutch Guyana, Suriname. If you're as confused as me when I first saw this, take a look at the current map of Guyana overlaid for reference. Take careful note of the words Great Britain that runs through this shaded area right here. We will get back to that. Mr. Shamburg conducted a series of expeditions between 1841 and 1844 and marked a line between the British territory and Venezuela. This line underwent revisions which eventually arrived at this. The first line is the one in solid red and the extension is the dashed red line. The laugh is, that the British was claiming even more territory deeper into the west, which is represented by the dotted red line. Anybody in the right mind would find fault with that for many reasons, but specifically, this man was aligned with Great Britain, and this line keeps moving further west after each of his expeditions. Let's pause here for a moment and acknowledge two things. Venezuela was an independent nation, and the colonizers were practically robbing them of their land. That's one. Let's also acknowledge that the entire region of Essequibo was never a part of the dispute at that time. It is just a portion to the far west. Between 1841 to 1883, Venezuela complained bitterly about this border and was trying to negotiate a diplomatic settlement with British Guyana. After talks continued to fail, Venezuela proposed that the boundary be settled by arbitration in November 1883. This proposal was rejected by the Brits, who cited that Venezuela may not abide by the award if it had proved unfavorable to them, and that if the arbitrator should decide in favor of the Venezuelan government and give them the full extent of their claim, a large and important territory, which has for a long period been inhabited and occupied by Her Majesty's subjects and treated as part of the colony of British Guyana, would be severed from the Queen's dominions. Venezuela then tried to give assurances that they will abide, but was still rejected until in 1887 they decided that they had enough and will suspend diplomatic relations with the Brits because of their provocation and aggravation. That it made no sense being friendly with a state that injures Venezuela. This prompted the intervention of the United States, which saw the impasse as a threat to their enforcement of the Monroe Doctrine. That there is another can of worms. But what the US did was offer to mediate a settlement through a good offices process. Venezuela welcomed the intervention. The British still was resisting and refused to come to the table, even in the face of what amounted to threats by the US to invoke the Monroe Doctrine to provide military support to Venezuela. In 1895, the US Congress approved funds to establish a United States-Venezuela Border Commission to investigate as a third party the territorial claims of both Venezuela and the Brits. The commission was chaired by a US Supreme Court Judge, David J. Brewer, and effectively created an environment of pressure which eventually brought Great Britain to the table to agree to arbitration. The British finally agreed to submit the territorial dispute to arbitration in 1896, and in 1897, they signed the Treaty of Washington. The arbitration tribunal was constituted and consisted of 5 members, 2 who represented Great Britain's interest, 2 who represented Venezuela's interest, and the 5th jurist was selected by the 4 distinguished gentlemen representing the 2 parties. They appointed Russian jurist Fyodor Fyodorovich Martins to head the tribunal. This now set the stage for the 1899 Arbitral Award. Let me just plug this in here so you could get familiar with this name. Mr. Severo Mallet Prevost. Mr. Mallet Prevost was a Venezuelan attorney who served as the secretary of the newly formed tribunal. He is the man who purportedly authored a document I call the Dead Man's Memorandum. More on that later. The arbitration tribunal successfully adjudicated the matter and arrived at a verdict in 1899. This award not only saw the British giving up territory that they were claiming further west, but they also lost territory that they had already carved out for British Guyana via their guy, Mr. Shamburg. It's interesting that Mr. Shamburg's line turned out to be a sham. It's in the name. Anyways, the border dispute was now settled. Venezuela was now happy and celebrated the award as a win, which it was because they gained territory that was previously understood as British territory, and they well and rub it in the British face. Shortly after the arbitral award was delivered by the tribunal, the parties established a joint boundary commission to physically demarcate the new boundary. The boundary commission took 5 years to physically make permanent markings, which were keenly monitored by observers of both the Brits and Venezuelan representatives, and are still visible today, deep in the jungle to the west. Out of that boundary commission, the map of Guyana as we know it was born. That's it for part 1 of this episode. Tune in next week to Guyana Uncut on YouTube for the continuation of this topic, which will bring you up to present day on the historical timeline of the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy and why Venezuela catch the proverbial zombie and started kicking up a storm again years after the dispute was settled. And if you're interested in advertising on this show, message me personally on WhatsApp at 592-659-6151 and request the quote. Yo, my name is Mudwata. Boom out!
Hold up.